Hello everybody, I am Tom and you are watching me talk about Warframe. There was Devstream 129 on, I don't know, about 7 hours ago at time of recording. I'm just going to do a quick overview of it. I'll splice in relevant pictures where they're relevant, otherwise you're just going to have my notes on screen because it's, honestly, it's easier for you to just read along with what the notes that I took with it than it would be for me to have gameplay or whatever. But first things first, they talked about some consoles stuff. All consoles are trying to get into cert for this week, so certification should be done this week, and you should be on patch 24.5. Reb wasn't entirely sure about that, but she seemed fairly confident, and nobody corrected her, so I assume that's probably correct. And specifically for the Switch, Steve was talking about how he'd be working with the team for better and more consistent frame rates on the Switch version, as well as reintroducing the volumetric lighting that they had originally when they first launched it, and they had to actually get rid of it because I assume the Switch couldn't handle it. That's all stuff, console stuff. That was the first thing they talked about. Next was art assets. Firstly, they had the handsome Grineer. As I'm talking about these, I'll just have the photos up so you'll be able to see them. But this was a Grineer that was from the trailer that they did for the Warframe trailer they did at TennoCon. And supposedly this is what one of the original Grineer looked like before all the cloning screwed them up and made them look horrible, so pretty handsome dudes apparently. Next up we had the Harrow Deluxe skin. It looked really, really cool. The way that it had sort of like energy replacing certain parts of the arms, and like they weren't really properly corporeal. Looks really, really good. I'll just be quiet for a second so you can have a look at it. Alright, so next up we have Zephyr Deluxe, which is, I mean, that was announced like, shit, 2016, 2015 maybe even? Like, we're talking like 4 years. It's been a while since they said, yeah, we'll do Zephyr Deluxe. But the artist who was working on it finally got around to working on it because they were doing a lot of other stuff. They're busy. But there was a sort of concept there, which I'll throw up now. I'm sure it's already thrown up. But it looks pretty good. I mean, it's early stages, but it does look really, really good. That's one problem I have with Zephyr is there's a lot of her skins I don't really like that much, but this one actually looks really good, so I'm hoping they get this done soonish, because then I might use Zephyr more in all honesty. Next they showed some stuff from the Devstream Paradox trailer, some assets for that. Firstly we have it is a form of a Dax. As I said when I first watched it, it looks kind of like a Dax, and apparently it is a Dax in some form or another. Rather vaguely. We also had the sword as well that he had. A really cool looking sword, which I'm sure we'll be able to get as well. And also the horse that went along with all of them. It's the form of a horse. Yeah, it was interesting. It didn't tell us a huge amount more about it looking at those assets, but they're cool assets to look at nonetheless. And the fact that it wasn't like pre-rendered cutscene. Well, it was pre-rendered cutscene, but it wasn't like they've actually modeled all of that stuff for in-game, which is quite cool. We also had confirmation that the man in the Devstream Paradox trailer was in actual fact the operator as an adult. I'm all for this. Sounds absolutely fantastic. I really want to... Hopefully... I mean, this doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to have an adult operator, but that's where my hope is that they're driving towards, is the fact that we will just have at least the option to have our operator just stay an adult, because that would be awesome for me. Next up we talked about new rework that they're planning on doing, and Scott has said that he started to look at Vauban. Very, very early stages. He hasn't really have any ideas about it yet even. It's more that he's thought about thinking about Vauban. And he said he'd done that after he'd put the final touches on Grendel. So Grendel seems to be pretty much done. And later on in the video we would go over Gauss. So Gauss and Grendel both pretty much done, and they talked about later that they're probably going to release both at about the same time. That's what they're aiming for anyway. Next up, we have Vault having cloth physics, which is insane. I think I heard one of the people there talk about, oh look, we're finally out of beta, because Vault has cloth physics, which is quite funny. But that's a long time coming. He just hasn't had cloth physics for the longest time, and I mean, people didn't really know why. He just didn't have them. It was kind of strange. But they used that at the same time to point out the fact that they now have the ability, well, they're going to add the ability, so that you can link both your cosmetic choices as well as your mod loadout to people in the chat, which is really, really good and will save a lot of time. I mean, particularly as well for Like, mod loadouts specifically would be really, really useful if you're looking for someone that you want to run a specific role in a group you're running or something like that. Say, hey, do you have this loadout or something similar? I can't see myself using it all that often, except for maybe when I'm talking with my friends and they're like, oh, what are you using for X Warframe? And then I can just show them. Of course, I have videos for all of this, so it's less relevant. I can just show them the video and then they can just copy it off that. But if we happen to be playing, it'll be quicker to show the loadout that way. Also, with loadouts, they've changed them a bit now. You can actually favorite some of them, so they'll show up first, which is really, really good. One problem that loadouts have is that they stay in a specific order as they currently stand. So being able to put the ones that you want first, rather than be in the order they were created, just is probably... I think they go in the order that they were created, or alphabetical. I'm pretty sure it was the order they were created. So, like, you could name stuff how you wanted, but it'd be, like, halfway through this big list of loadouts. So you can now favorite them, so it'll put them at the front, which is really nice. You can also change the little image that dictates what your loadout actually is, which is cool, I guess, but I always thought that having a picture of the Warframe it is of a loadout of is probably the most useful, but I mean, I guess if you want different ones, sure. Wukong Deluxe is shipping sometime next week, hopefully. Always the caveat that it's hopefully shipping sometime next week. But it looks really, really good. I think it's probably going to be the skin I use on my Wukong Prime. Next we had the Shamazin cosmetic. They showed off a little bit of that. If you have the actual ship cosmetic for the Shamazin, it will actually add an emote where you can actually play the Shamazin, and it's like actual playable. By the look of it, they had 3 notes with 3 different fret combinations. So 9 notes in total, I suppose. Yeah, that just seems really cool. I mean, it's kind of a small thing, but it's cool nonetheless. Now we get into like the big meat of it, which is upcoming Warframes. They looked at Gauss specifically this week. There was a lot of RIP Vault in the chat. But Reb says that they're more likely to complement each other rather than compete. After looking at the abilities, I'd say that's probably correct. First, let me go over his 1. He gets like a burst of speed, and you can hold it for longer, obviously. It's fairly unidirectional, compared to like Vaults where you can go really fast, and then you can turn and stuff like normal. Gauss seems to be, once you are running, like Reb showed moving a mouse and doing the turning circle on the Plains of Eidolon was like enormous. Like your actual ability to turn is a lot less, so it's more for running really, really fast in a straight line. And you can tap it for small bursts of speed. And they did show you can indeed run on water, and if you stop midway through, you fall into the water. But the main point of this ability is actually to ram into things, which is quite different from Vaults. Vaults just kind of gives him speed, whereas this has a point to actually ram things. Both enemies and the environment in general will create like shockwaves when you actually hit them. So it's like an explosion of kinetic energy, I suppose. It seemed to ragdoll enemies and do a bit of damage. It's hard to say how that damage will come out and be balanced, because Reb was playing with a bunch of, like she had infinite energy and she had like God mode on. That may have been the only thing she had on, but it's always hard to tell just from seeing gameplay like that. You have to really play with it by yourself to be able to see how it comes out. But even if all it did was ragdoll, it would be pretty good. I mean, a 1 doesn't have to do amazing damage if it can do some control like that. Next up was his 2, which is called Kinetic Plating. It protects against, and Reb was quite specific to say physical, cold, and heat damage. So, presumably not electricity damage, or, what's it called? The word will come to me. But essentially, it seems to be specifically physical, cold, and heat damage. That's what Reb said. And the fact that she didn't say it just protects against that, instead of saying protects against damage, she said protects against physical, cold, and heat damage. Which is interesting. I mean, I'm okay with it, but it depletes from a gauge. The gauge is like his rev gauge. You seem to build that up by just going fast. Or not going fast even specifically, but by moving. And if you move fast, you'll go up faster. But his 2 depletes from that gauge. And also, as it depletes, it gives Gauss energy, which is quite good. And then his 3, he has a kind of really cool combo AoE. So he either expands or drains the surrounding kinetic energy, i.e. its heat or cold damage respectively. But you can tap his 3 for a cold AoE, you can hold it for a bit, and it gives you a heat AoE. If you combine both, it will give you a blast proc. If you double cold, it will freeze all the enemies, as in freeze solid. because it'll do the cold proc and then it'll do the freeze proc. And double heat will ignite them, so it'll get them like blazing on fire, which is really quite cool. And then onto his 4, it's called Redline. It seems to just be like an everything buff. It seems to give him like faster fire rate, it gives him faster melee speed. I assume probably more damage. It also seemed to synergize with his other stuff, so shockwaves with your 1 seem to be bigger and doing more when he was in Redline as opposed to not. It's like a toggleable thing. It's dependent on his rev gauge, and you want to always be moving so you can build that rev gauge. It still wasn't entirely clear to me what it is. It just seems like a buffed state where he's just better at doing things when he's in his 4. I'd have to play around with it to figure out what it is specifically, but that's what it seems like for now. And also they just mentioned his passive as well, which is the higher his gauge is, the faster his shields recharge, which is nice. It's like a perfectly fine passive. Nothing amazing, nothing great, nothing bad. Next we get on to Empyrean. They're planning, first things first is the dry dock. They're planning to have the ability to build that before Empyrean is properly launched, which is good because it's probably going to take a fair amount of resources to build that in our dojos. So I'm glad that they're planning on doing that. There was also a thing in the gameplay for the Kuva Lich, I believe it was there was melee takedowns that they were doing, and it was using some kind of like Assassin's Creed like retractable blade thing. That is apparently going to be a multi-tool that every Warframe is going to have, and it's going to be used for hacking and for optional finishes, is what was said. Specifically, they said optional finishes, so I'm guessing there's still going to be melee finishes by the look of it. They also started to talk about crew slots, and the effect that and they'll have like sort of effect on the stats of the Railjack, depending on what faction you have in what crew and all that kind of stuff, which is interesting. I mean, I'm going to have to play around with it to see how good it is, but we'll see. They talked about the fact that there's going to be universal blink on Arcwing, and they're going to link it to the forward dodge, so no input, just push dodge, or forward dodge, I suppose, is going to be a blink now for all Warframes, and the Itzel is getting its blink ability replaced with like a grappling hook, like Valkyr's Ripline was what Scott said. So that's interesting. Being able to pull enemies towards you is probably a fairly good thing, I suppose. Although, the way that Arcwing melee works, you just hit the melee button and you go shooting over to an enemy anyway, so... we'll see. It's apparently Reb was saying it's quite good there and it works really well, but it seems weird to me, but we'll see, I guess. They also talked about rebalancing Arcwing in general, just because there's going to be so much more emphasis on it with Railjack coming, that they really need to look at it and rebalance some stuff, which sounds really, really good to me, because I really don't like Arcwing that much. Like, I feel like a lot of the Arcwing level designs as it stands aren't amazingly good. I may actually enjoy it more in Arcwing, in Empyrean rather, because it's in a more open area. So if you've got it in a more open area, it gives you the ability to go really fast and fly around, and that's the part of Arcwing I actually really like, is going very, very fast. And the problem that I have with it is that a lot of the levels and stuff don't really facilitate that, because you like bump into walls and you bonk on everything. It's just not very good. But anyway. Also, they talked about releasing Empyrean. They're probably going to release it with the orbit of a few planets plus deep space, is what Steve said. And that's pretty much it. The last thing is they went over Steve's Twitter, and he was showing off... They were going to some of his tweets where he was showing off some lighting and shadow effects and things. The only thing I'll say here is if you want to see stuff like that periodically, it's really good to follow Steve, because he does occasionally just tweet stuff out that he's working on. It's at SJ_Sinclair, I believe. But if you go follow him there, you can see... At least once a week, usually, he's tweeting something out that's kind of useful. Or rather, kind of interesting about how they're doing, like, the back end of lighting or things like that. But that's about it. So thanks for watching. I shall see you next time. Like the video if you liked. Subscribe if you're not already. See you guys.